The air inside the Senate Judiciary Committee room didn't just feel heavy, it felt engineered. You could almost smell the expensive cologne of the lobbyists lingering in the hallways, a scent that usually signals a done deal before the first gavel even hits the wood. But today, the silence was different. It wasn't the quiet of a routine procedure. It was the stillness that comes right before a storm breaks over the Capitol. Josh Hawley sat at his desk, his eyes not on the cameras, but on the row of executives lined up like soldiers from an empire that thought it was too big to fail. Visa and Mastercard. Those two names are etched into the plastic in your wallet. But in this room, they represented something much darker than convenience. They represented a duopoly that has held the American dream by the throat for decades. Behind Hawley, the gold-trimmed curtains of the Senate seemed to frame him as he leaned forward, his jaw set in a way that told everyone in the room he wasn't there for a soundbite. He was there for a reckoning. This wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about the small business owner in Missouri who stays up late wondering why their margins are disappearing. Across the aisle, Dick Durbin watched with a calculated intensity. In a city where Republicans and Democrats usually can't agree on the color of the sky, the sight of Hawley and Durbin flanking the same target was the first sign that the giants were in trouble. The lobbyists in the back row started shifting in their seats. They've seen Hawley in action before, and they knew that when he starts flipping through his notes with that specific calm deliberation, someone is about to get burned. The giants of the credit card world had arrived thinking they were the smartest guys in the room. If you believe that someone needs to finally stand up to these corporate giants, do me a huge favor and hit that like button right now to help spread this message. Hawley cleared his throat, and the room went dead silent. He didn't start with a question. He started with a reality check that hit like a physical weight. He looked directly at the CEOs, the men who oversee a system that processed trillions of dollars, while the average American struggled to keep up with inflation. He started talking about the numbers, but not the kind you see in a dry annual report. He talked about the $1.17 trillion in credit card debt that is currently crushing American families. The numbers were staggering, but it was the way Hawley delivered them that changed the temperature of the room. He spoke with a rhythmic, driving cadence, pointing out that while families are choosing between groceries and gas, these companies are sitting on profit margins that exceed 50%. It's a level of wealth that is almost hard to comprehend for anyone who actually works for a living. Hawley described it as a classic monopolistic behavior, a system where the rules are written by the powerful for the powerful, leaving everyone else to fight for the scraps. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more intimate, yet more dangerous. You see, when you swipe that card at a local coffee shop or a hardware store, you think you're just paying for a service. But Hawley painted a picture of a hidden tax, a silent predator that takes a cut of every single transaction in this country. It's a fee that the merchant can't negotiate and the consumer can't avoid. It's a closed loop, a digital fortress where Visa and Mastercard set the price, and the rest of America just has to pay up. At this point in the hearing, one of the executives tried to pivot to a prepared talking point about security and innovation. It was a classic corporate move, the kind of polished corporate speak designed to put people to sleep while they picked their pockets. But Hawley wasn't having it. He cut through the jargon like a hot knife through butter. He asked them why, if they were so innovative, the fees only seemed to go in one direction, and that direction was up. He wasn't asking for an explanation. He was exposing a scam. We want to hear from you down in the comments. Have you noticed your local shops starting to charge extra for card swipes? The tension was so thick you could have carved it with a pen. Hawley pointed out that in any other industry, competition drives prices down. If there were 10 different networks fighting for your business, those swipe fees would be pennies. But in the world of big credit, there is no competition. There is only the wall. He stood there as the voice of the baker, the mechanic, and the single mom, asking the hard questions that the high-paid consultants hoped would never be asked on a public stage. As he continued, Hawley didn't just attack their business model, he attacked their arrogance. He mocked the idea that these companies were somehow the victims of regulation. He laid out the facts showing that they effectively control 80% of the market. When two companies hold that much power, they don't have customers, they have subjects. And Josh Hawley was making it very clear that the era of being a submissive subject to the credit card cartel was coming to a very loud and very public end. The beauty of the moment was in the simplicity of the truth he was telling. He wasn't using complex economic theories to confuse the public. He was talking about fairness. He was talking about the fact that it is fundamentally un-American for a company to have the power to tax the entire economy without any accountability. Every time he stopped for a breath, you could hear the frantic typing of reporters in the gallery. They knew they were witnessing a rare moment of genuine political courage in a town known for cowardice. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because we are going to follow this fight until the very end, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Hawley then turned his attention to the interest rates, those predatory numbers that keep people trapped in a cycle of debt for years. He mentioned the 29% APR that has become the new normal. He asked how anyone could justify charging that much when the cost of borrowing for the banks themselves was so low. It was a mathematical takedown of a system designed to keep the poor poor and the rich richer. The executives looked like they wanted to be anywhere else but in that hot seat. One by one, the excuses started to crumble. The polished executives began to stutter, their carefully rehearsed answers failing them under the pressure of Hawley's relentless logic. He wasn't letting them off the hook with easy answers. He was digging deeper, asking about the backdoor deals and the way they pressure banks to stay within their ecosystem. He was pulling back the curtain on a global financial machine that most people don't even realize exists, even though it dictates their daily lives. The drama wasn't just in the words, it was in the body language. Hawley remained perfectly composed, a sharp contrast to the sweating men in front of him. He was the picture of a man who knew he had the moral high ground. He wasn't just representing a state, he was representing a movement of people who are tired of being treated like an ATM for Wall Street. The hearing was no longer a boring government meeting. It had become a high-stakes courtroom drama where the defendants were finally being forced to face their victims. As the first hour of the hearing drew to a close, the momentum was clearly on Hawley's side. He had successfully reframed the entire debate. It was no longer about technical financial regulations. It was about whether or not we still live in a country where the little guy has a fighting chance. He had laid the groundwork for a legislative battle that would send shockwaves through the financial district. And he was just getting started, his eyes flashing with the fire of a man who knows he's winning a fight that everyone told him was impossible. The executives tried to regain their footing by leaning on the concept of rewards. It's the ultimate carrot they dangle in front of the American consumer. The airline miles, the cash back, the shiny perks that make you feel like you're winning the game. One of the CEOs cleared his throat and began a practice monologue about how any interference in their fee structure would destroy the beloved rewards programs that millions of Americans rely on. It was a veiled threat, a classic scare tactic designed to make the public fear the very person trying to save them. But Josh Hawley didn't blink. In fact, he leaned in further, a thin, knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew this move was coming. He pointed out that these so-called rewards are bought and paid for by the very people who can least afford them. He explained, with the precision of a surgeon, how the hidden fees forced onto small businesses are passed down to every customer in the form of higher prices. Whether you pay with a premium gold card or cold hard cash, you're paying for someone else's first-class flight. It was a devastating point that stripped away the glamour of the industry. Hawley was exposing the reward system for what it truly is, a massive redistribution of wealth from the working class to the elite, facilitated by a plastic gatekeeper. He called it a shell game, a sophisticated way to distract the masses while the giants take their cut of every loaf of bread and every gallon of milk sold in America. The room felt even tighter now, as the illusion of the benevolent credit card company began to evaporate under the harsh lights of the Senate chamber. If this breakdown of the hidden costs in your life is opening your eyes, make sure to drop a comment below and let us know. Did you realize you were paying for those rewards even when using cash? Hawley then pivoted to the technology itself. The industry often hides behind the word innovation as if it's a magical shield against any criticism. They talk about the billions spent on cybersecurity and fraud prevention as if they are doing the world a favor. Hawley took that argument and turned it on its head. He asked why, if their systems are so advanced and efficient, the cost to process a transaction hasn't dropped to near zero, just like the cost of sending an email or streaming a video has over the last decade. The silence that followed was deafening. The CEO of Visa looked down at his notes, but there was no script for this. In a truly competitive market, technology drives costs down for the consumer. But in a cartel, technology is just another way to lock the doors and keep the competitors out. Hawley was pointing out the fundamental flaw in their narrative. They weren't innovators in the sense of making life cheaper for Americans. They were innovators in the art of rent-seeking, finding new ways to insert themselves into the middle of every economic interaction. He began to read from a list of small business owners from his home state of Missouri. He spoke about a local grocer who pays more in credit card swipe fees than he does for his own health insurance. He spoke about a family-owned hardware store where the annual fees paid to the credit companies could have hired 2 new full-time employees. These weren't just statistics to Hawley. They were the heart and soul of the American economy being drained dry by a digital parasite. His voice rose in intensity as he demanded to know how these companies could justify such a stranglehold on the lifeblood of commerce. He wasn't just asking for the sake of the record anymore. He was demanding an apology on behalf of every entrepreneur who has ever stayed up at night staring at a balance sheet that doesn't add up. The CEOs sat there, their expensive suits suddenly looking like armor that had been pierced. They had no answer for the grocer in Missouri. They had no answer for the hardware store owner. This is the moment where the power dynamic truly shifted. You could see it in the way the cameras began to cluster around Hawley's end of the table. He was no longer just a junior senator from the Midwest. He was the lead prosecutor in the trial of the century. He was dismantling the myth that these companies are a necessary evil. He was showing the world that they are an unnecessary burden, a weight around the neck of every hard-working person trying to get ahead in a rigged system. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now, because the next round of questioning is where things get truly explosive. Hawley shifted the focus to the global stage, comparing the American system to the rest of the world. He pointed out that in Europe, regulators stepped in years ago to cap these fees at a fraction of what Americans are forced to pay. He asked why a merchant in Paris or Berlin pays less than half of what a merchant in St. Louis pays for the exact same transaction. Is American electricity more expensive? Is the fiber optic cable in the U.S. made of gold? Of course not. The only difference is the lack of backbone in Washington. He was calling out the entire political establishment, not just the men sitting in front of him. He was highlighting the fact that for years, both parties had allowed this to continue because the lobbyist checks were too large to ignore. By standing there with Dick Durbin, Hawley was sending a message that the era of business as usual was over. The populist fire that Hawley has become known for was burning bright, and it was aimed directly at the heart of the financial district. The executives tried one last desperate maneuver. They started talking about the risks they take, the risk of fraud, the risk of non-payment. It was a play for sympathy that fell flat before it even left their lips. Hawley reminded them that when a consumer doesn't pay their bill, it's the bank that issued the card that takes the hit, not the network. Visa and Mastercard take their cut regardless of whether the debt is ever settled. They take the profit, and they leave the risk to everyone else. It was a masterclass in exposing corporate cowardice. Hawley showed that these giants have built a world where they can never lose. They have created a heads-I-win, tails-you-lose scenario that would make a casino owner blush. He hammered home the point that this isn't capitalism, it's a protection racket. If you want to do business in the 21st century, you have to pay the Visa tax, or you don't get to play the game at all. As the second hour drew to a close, Hawley began to lay out the specifics of the Credit Card Competition Act. He described it as a simple, common-sense solution. Require the big banks to offer at least 2 different networks for every transaction, and ensure that those 2 networks aren't both owned by the same giant. It's a move that would force competition back into the room. It would force these companies to actually earn their fees instead of just demanding them. The pushback from the executives was immediate and frantic. They claimed it would compromise security, that it would open the door to foreign actors, that it would break the entire financial grid. Hawley laughed it off. He pointed out that the same security standards would apply to every network. He exposed their security argument for what it was, a desperate attempt to maintain a monopoly. He was calling their bluff in front of the entire nation, and he was doing it with a level of confidence that was nothing short of cinematic. The energy in the room was electric. Even the staff members and the interns, usually jaded by the slow grind of government, were leaning forward. They knew they were watching a rare moment where the curtain is pulled back and the true gears of power are revealed. Josh Hawley wasn't just winning a debate. He was starting a revolution against the plastic empire. And as he gathered his papers for the next round, the look in his eyes said everything. He wasn't going to stop until the monopoly was broken. The afternoon sun began to slant through the high windows of the hearing room, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the dark complexities of the financial web Josh Hawley was unraveling. He turned his attention to a document that had been sitting on his desk, a record of the interchange fees that have quietly doubled over the last decade. He looked at the CEOs and asked a question that cut through the air like a siren. If the cost of technology is going down and the volume of transactions is going up, why are your fees hitting record highs every single year? The response from the table was a stutter of corporate jargon about value-added services and ecosystem integrity. It was the kind of language designed to confuse, to make the listener feel like they aren't smart enough to understand the brilliance of global finance. But Hawley wasn't confused. He was disgusted. He pointed out that the value they were adding was mostly to their own stock price, while the integrity of the American family budget was being compromised. He was stripping away the mask of the corporate elite, showing the raw greed hiding beneath the polite smiles. He started talking about the swipe fee tax in a way that made it feel personal to every person watching. He calculated that the average American family pays hundreds of dollars a year in hidden fees they never agreed to. Think about that for a second. That's money that could have gone into a college fund, a car repair, or just a few extra bags of groceries. Instead, it's being funneled into the glass towers of New York and San Francisco. Hawley called it a silent theft, a digital pickpocketing operation that happens billions of times a day. If you think it's time to stop this digital pickpocketing, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see the truth. The drama intensified when Hawley brought up the role of the big banks. He explained how Visa and Mastercard aren't just independent networks. They are the enforcers for a cartel of the largest financial institutions in the world. He described a cozy relationship where the banks and the networks work hand in hand to ensure that no outsider can ever break into the market. It's a closed shop, a private club where the entrance fee is your financial freedom. Hawley was naming names, calling out the big Wall Street banks that profit from every swipe. He challenged the executives on their exclusivity deals, the secret contracts that prevent smaller, cheaper networks from even getting a seat at the table. He asked them why they were so afraid of a little healthy competition. If their service was truly the best, wouldn't they welcome a fair fight? The silence from the executive table was his answer. They weren't afraid of failing. They were afraid of a fair market. They have spent billions on lobbyists to ensure they never have to actually compete on price or quality. The atmosphere in the room turned icy as Hawley began to detail the predatory nature of the late fees and interest rate hikes that often go hand in hand with these cards. He spoke about the debt trap, a system designed to be easy to get into but nearly impossible to escape. He looked at the executives and asked how they could sleep at night knowing their business model relies on people failing. He was no longer just a legislator. He was a moral voice calling out a system that rewards exploitation. We want to know your story. Have you ever felt trapped by a credit card's rising interest rates or hidden fees? Tell us about it in the comments. As Hawley spoke, the contrast between him and the men across the table couldn't have been sharper. He represented the restless energy of a new generation of leaders who aren't afraid to break the old rules. The executives represented a dying era of corporate dominance that thought it was untouchable. Hawley was showing them that in the age of transparency, no one is untouchable. He was using the power of the Senate to shine a light into the darkest corners of the financial industry, and the giants were blinking in the glare. He then moved to the issue of data. In the digital age, information is the new gold, and Visa and Mastercard sit on a mountain of it. They know what you buy, where you buy it, and when you buy it. Hawley questioned what they do with that data and who they sell it to. He raised the alarm about the privacy of every American, pointing out that these companies have built a surveillance apparatus that would make a dictator jealous. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the fundamental right to live your life without being tracked by a corporate entity. The CEOs tried to assure him that they take privacy seriously, but Hawley was ready with a rebuttal. He cited instances where data had been shared or used in ways that the average consumer would find shocking. He was painting a picture of a future where your every move is monetized, where your financial history is used against you, and where you have zero control over your own information. It was a chilling segment that moved the conversation from the wallet to the very soul of American liberty. This is exactly why you need to be subscribed to this channel. We are digging into the stories that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch, especially when it involves the world's most powerful corporations. One of the most powerful moments came when Hawley addressed the security fees again. He revealed that despite these massive fees, fraud is actually at record highs. He asked the simple question, if we are paying you billions for security, why is our data being leaked and our accounts being hacked more than ever? He was exposing the ultimate corporate bait and switch. They take the money for a service they aren't fully providing, and then they have the audacity to ask for more. The hearing had become a masterclass in political theater, but with a purpose. Every word Hawley spoke was designed to build a case for the Credit Card Competition Act. He was showing that the current system is broken, biased, and fundamentally unfair. He was building a bridge between the struggles of the average person and the high-level policy of Washington. He was making the complex simple, and in doing so, he was making the giants very, very nervous. As he wrapped up this segment of questioning, Hawley looked directly into the lens of the K-SPAN camera. He wasn't talking to the room anymore. He was talking to the millions of people at home who feel like the system is rigged against them. He promised them that he wouldn't back down. He promised them that as long as he had a seat in that chamber, he would fight to break the grip of the credit card cartel. The fire in his eyes was unmistakable. This was a man on a mission. The room took a brief recess. but the impact of Hawley's words lingered. The lobbyists were huddled in the corners, their phones buzzing with frantic messages. The unbreakable consensus of the financial world had been shattered. Josh Hawley had stepped into the ring with the heavyweights, and he hadn't just survived. He was winning. The second half of the hearing was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher for the future of the American economy. Tuli Viji, Changtan Hang Sai GGC Han, MT Nier Chang Huan Ca Bin Kuch, Bin Sb Thine. Trong Fan Fan 4. Chung Ta Sen Thi Josh Hawley Tung Yash Hawley Tung Jusage Turn on a Mu Jang Sao Hu Trong Cash Kok Tinape Wo Ne Thou Tung Chin Trong Guhok GH U Gai Thi Ki Kuk CEO CC Jiang Fun Kik Nang Thig Dieter Chak Nung Bin Ching Han Thep DGI K Law 2.210 T Tip Theo Fine 4 6th Lose Tung this adjusted Chung Asiris Trong Yang a Mu Jiang Sound Hu Trong Chash Theros with Yue Chung Day Ti Ki Kuk Si Isu Gai Gi Kong Si Nin Fan Vang. The gavel struck the wood once more, signaling the end of the recess, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted permanently. The executives returned to their seats, looking less like masters of the universe and more like defendants in a high-stakes trial. Josh Hawley sat back, his fingers steepled, watching them with the calm intensity of a predator who knows the exits are all locked. He didn't waste a second. He dived straight into the dark money, the millions upon millions of dollars these companies spend on lobbying to keep their monopoly intact and their secrets safe. He began listing the contributions, the dark money groups, and the strategic donations made to key committees over the last decade. It was a surgical strike against the very foundation of the Washington establishment. Hawley was pointing out that the reason nothing ever changes isn't because the ideas are bad, but because the price of silence is so high. He looked the CEOs in the eye and asked them plainly, how much does it cost to buy a vote in this town? The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as the executives scrambled for a polite way to say nothing. This was the moment Hawley moved from being a policy critic to being a giant slayer. He was exposing the machinery of influence that keeps the Visa tax alive. He described a system where the rules are written by the very people they are supposed to regulate, a revolving door between the corporate boardrooms and the halls of power. It was a betrayal of the American people, and Hawley was making sure every person watching at home understood exactly how the game was rigged against them from the start. If you're tired of seeing your hard-earned money used to buy political influence, make sure you hit that like button to show your support for transparency and fairness. One of the CEOs tried to defend their lobbying efforts as educational outreach, claiming they were simply helping lawmakers understand the complexities of the global payments industry. Hawley didn't just reject the answer, he mocked it. He pointed out that educational outreach usually doesn't involve seven-figure checks and private jets. He was cutting through the polite fictions of D.C. with a blunt honesty that felt like a fresh breeze in a stagnant swamp. He was speaking for the millions of Americans who feel like their voices are drowned out by corporate cash. He then shifted the focus to the impact on innovation, or the lack thereof. Hawley brought up the stories of dozens of fintech startups that had been crushed or bought out before they could ever challenge the big two. He painted a picture of a kill zone around Visa and Mastercard, where any new idea is either absorbed or destroyed to protect the status quo. It's a graveyard of American ingenuity, all sacrificed at the altar of a duopoly that refuses to let the market work the way it was intended. The drama reached a fever pitch when Hawley produced a set of internal emails that had been leaked or uncovered during the investigation. He began reading excerpts that suggested the companies were actively coordinating their fee hikes to ensure that merchants had nowhere to turn. It was the smoking gun the room had been waiting for. The legal teams behind the executives started whispering frantically. but the damage was done. Hawley was presenting evidence of a coordinated assault on the American pocketbook, and the world was watching in real time. Share this video right now on your social media, because the mainstream networks are going to try and bury these leaked emails before they go viral. The tension was so high you could hear the hum of the air conditioning in the silence between Hawley's sentences. He was building a narrative of a corporate empire that had grown so large it felt it was above the law. He reminded the room that the Sherman Antitrust Act wasn't written for fun. It was written to stop exactly this kind of behavior. He was calling for a return to the days of trust-busting, evoking the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt to take on the digital barons of the 21st century. He turned his gaze back to the interest rates, which had become a focal point of national outrage. He asked why the risk-based pricing always seemed to go up for the consumer, but never down when the economy improved. He exposed the algorithms that track every missed payment but ignore every decade of loyalty. He was humanizing the data, turning cold percentages into the stories of families losing their homes or students being drowned in debt before they even graduate. Hawley was the advocate that the forgotten middle class had been waiting for. The pushback from the corporate side was getting weaker. They tried to talk about the convenience of the digital age, but Hawley pointed out that convenience shouldn't come at the cost of your financial soul. He argued that we have traded our freedom for a slightly faster checkout line, and the price was becoming too high to pay. He was challenging the very definition of progress, asking if it's really progress when the rich get exponentially richer while the average family's purchasing power continues to shrink year after year. Make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on, because we're about to get into the final confrontation that changed everything. In a stunning move, Hawley then invited a small business owner from the gallery to stand up, a rare breach of protocol that showed just how much he was willing to shake things up. He asked the CEOs to look at this man, a veteran who ran a small shop, and explain to him why he had to pay more in fees than he made in personal take-home pay last month. The visual was powerful. It was the face of the American worker versus the face of global capital. The CEOs couldn't even meet the man's eyes. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a moral reckoning. Hawley was showing that the economy isn't just about spreadsheets and stock tickers. It's about people. It's about the dignity of work and the right to keep what you earn. He was dismantling the trickle-down myth and showing that in the world of credit card fees, everything trickles up to the very top, leaving the bottom of the pyramid dry. His words were a call to arms for anyone who believes that the American dream should be accessible to everyone, not just those with a corporate title. As he finished this round of questioning, Hawley looked exhausted but exhilarated. He had laid out a case that was impossible to ignore. He had connected the dots between high fees, political corruption, and the erosion of the middle class. He had shown that the credit card cartel wasn't just a business problem. It was a national security problem. He sat back, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room, knowing that the fight was far from over, but that the first major blow had been landed with devastating precision. The lobbyists were already fleeing the room to make their frantic calls to the party leaders. They knew the narrative was slipping away from them. Josh Hawley had taken their best arguments and shredded them in front of a national audience. He had proven that one man with the truth on his side can indeed stand up to the most powerful forces in the world. And as the next senator prepared to speak, everyone knew that the real story of the day had already been written in the fire of Hawley's questions. The spectacle that followed was something Washington veterans whispered about for weeks. It wasn't just Josh Hawley's fire that was consuming the room anymore. It was the strategic alliance he had formed with a man who sat on the complete opposite end of the ideological spectrum. Dick Durbin, the veteran Democrat from Illinois, leaned forward, his quiet authority providing the perfect counterpoint to Hawley's aggressive populist energy. To see these two men, one a champion of the new right and the other a pillar of the democratic establishment, standing shoulder to shoulder, was the ultimate nightmare for the credit card lobby. Hawley nodded toward Durbin, a silent acknowledgement that the partisan walls had been dismantled for this specific mission. Durbin began to lay out the legislative history, reminding the CEOs that they had been warned for 20 years. He spoke about the Durbin Amendment of 2010 and how the industry had spent the last decade finding loopholes to keep their fees sky high. Hawley picked up the thread immediately, pointing out that the duopoly wasn't just a business term, it was a political shield. They had used the division in Washington to hide for years, but today, that shield was gone. The executives looked from Hawley to Durbin, their eyes darting like trapped animals. They were used to playing one side against the other, using Republican fears of regulation and Democratic desires for consumer protection as weapons. But Hawley and Durbin had bypassed the usual traps. They were talking about the same thing, the extortionate practices of Wall Street. Hawley described the alliance as a common-sense coalition of the unlikely, a group of leaders who realized that the struggle between Main Street and the credit card giants transcended party lines. If you believe that more politicians should put aside their differences to fight for the people like this, make sure you comment Main Street over Wall Street below. Hawley's voice took on a sharper edge as he described the swipe fee tax as a bipartisan failure that they were finally going to fix. He pointed out that every time a Republican talks about tax cuts and every time a Democrat talks about the cost of living, they should be looking at the 4% cut Visa takes from every transaction. It's a tax that doesn't go to fix roads or schools. It goes to fuel private jets and corporate retreats. By framing it this way, Hawley was making the issue impossible for his colleagues to ignore, regardless of their party. The hearing reached a cinematic peak when Durbin asked a question about the routing mandates, and Hawley followed up with a demand for the exact profit margins on those specific routes. The coordination was seamless. It was a tag-team effort that left the witnesses with no room to breathe. One CEO tried to appeal to conservative values of a free market, hoping to pull Hawley back into the partisan fold. Hawley's response was a cold reminder that a monopoly is the literal opposite of a free market. He was reclaiming the word capitalism from those who use it as a cover for greed. He began to describe the Credit Card Competition Act not as a regulation, but as a liberation. He spoke about freeing the American merchant from the plastic shackles of the current system. He and Durbin had designed the bill to ensure that for every swipe, there would be a choice. Competition, Hawley argued, is the American way. If Visa and Mastercard want to keep their market share, they should have to win it every single day by offering better service and lower prices. The logic was undeniable, and the CEO's silence was their admission of defeat. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more breakdowns of how power actually works in the halls of the Senate. The two senators then turned their attention to the hidden agreements between the networks and the banks. Durbin provided the institutional knowledge, and Hawley provided the moral outrage. They exposed how the big banks are essentially bribed with high interchange fees to keep the Visa Mastercard system in place. Hawley called it a kickback scheme, disguised as a financial service. He was painting a picture of a system that was fundamentally rotten at its core, a house of cards that was only standing because no one had dared to blow on it until now. As the afternoon light faded, the two men continued their relentless pursuit of the truth. They were no longer just senators. They were the voice of a frustrated nation. Hawley spoke about the bipartisan consensus of the people, noting that whether you're a farmer in Missouri or a teacher in Chicago, you're getting screwed by the same system. He was building a bridge between different Americas, using the credit card issue as the foundation. It was a powerful demonstration of what politics could look like if it were actually focused on the people. The lobbyists in the back were now visibly panicked. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had invested millions in ensuring that Hawley and Durbin would never work together. They had banked on the culture war to keep the Senate divided. But Hawley was showing that on the issues that truly matter, the issues that affect your bank account and your ability to provide for your family, the culture war is a distraction used by the powerful to keep the people from noticing the hand in their pocket. Make sure you've shared this video, because this rare moment of bipartisan cooperation is something you won't see highlighted on the major news networks tonight. Hawley wrapped up this segment by looking at Durbin and then back at the CEOs. He told them that the Durbin-Hawley alliance wasn't a one-time event. It was the beginning of a new era of accountability. He promised that they would be back, and they would bring more colleagues with them. The giants had enjoyed their decade of undisputed dominance, but the clock was ticking. The populist fire had met the institutional hammer, and the resulting sparks were enough to light a fire that could change the American economy forever. The hearing moved toward its final phase, but the impact of this alliance had already been felt across the globe. Stock prices for the major payment processors began to dip as the market realized the political landscape had changed. Josh Hawley sat back, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He had proven that he wasn't just a talker. He was a builder of coalitions. He had shown that he could reach across the aisle without compromising his values, all for the sake of the people he was elected to serve. The final hour of the hearing felt less like a government procedure and more like the closing argument of a world-changing trial. Josh Hawley stood up, not to leave, but to command the space one last time. He looked at the row of executives who were now packing their briefcases with trembling hands. He didn't offer a polite handshake. He offered a warning. He told them that the days of hiding behind complex algorithms and lobbyist-funded studies were over. The American people had seen behind the curtain, and they weren't going to look away. He spoke about the soul of the economy, arguing that a nation is only as strong as its smallest merchant and its hardest working family. When you allow a duopoly to tax every breath of commerce, you aren't just hurting bank accounts. You're hurting the very spirit of enterprise. Hawley's voice echoed in the marble chamber, a powerful reminder that power, in its truest form, belongs to the people, not the processors. He was reclaiming the narrative of the American dream from those who had turned it into a subscription service. As he looked into the cameras, Hawley addressed the viewers directly, his eyes burning with a conviction that couldn't be faked. He told them that the fight for the Credit Card Competition Act was just the beginning of a larger movement to take back control of their lives. He promised that this wasn't just a Washington moment that would be forgotten by next week. This was a line in the sand. He was the leader they had been waiting for, a man willing to burn bridges with the donor class to build a future for the working class. If you are ready to stand with Josh Hawley and fight for an economy that works for you, not just for Wall Street, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. The hero of our story didn't just end with a speech. He ended with a challenge. He challenged his colleagues in the Senate to choose a side. You are either with the small businesses in your district, or you are with the credit card cartel. There is no middle ground anymore. By making it a moral choice, Hawley had stripped away the political cover that many senators use to avoid tough votes. He was forcing the entire system to show its hand, and in doing so, he was proving that courage is the most contagious force in politics. He walked out of the hearing room, not into the arms of lobbyists, but toward a group of reporters and ordinary citizens waiting in the hall. He answered their questions with the same bluntness he used in the chamber. He didn't pivot. He doubled down. He talked about the upcoming vote and the pressure he expected the banks to apply. But he laughed it off, saying that no amount of corporate cash could outweigh the will of 100 million angry Americans with a credit card bill in their hand. This is your channel for the truth, And we want to hear your final thoughts. Do you think Josh Hawley has what it takes to break the monopoly once and for all? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video to help it reach more people. The legacy of this hearing would be felt for years. It was the moment the plastic empire began to crack. Because of Josh Hawley's relentless pursuit, the conversation had shifted from if the system would change to when. He had humanized the struggle, weaponized the facts, and united the most unlikely of allies. He had shown that the giants are only giants until someone is brave enough to look them in the eye and say, "No more." As the sun set over the Capitol dome, the image of Hawley leaning into that microphone remained burned into the national consciousness. It was the image of a man who understood that leadership isn't about being liked by the powerful. It's about being feared by the corrupt. The battle for the American wallet was far from over. But for the first time in a generation, the people had a champion who wasn't afraid of the fight. And as the screen fades to black, one thing is certain: Josh Hawley is just getting started.